You'll have often heard that cancel culture does not exist. Leading media commentators claim it's a right-wing myth and that nobody is actually getting cancelled. This will be a relief, of course, for Maya Forstater, a tax expert who lost her job for saying that women are female and human beings cannot change sex. The decision of the tribunal was overturned by the High Court and she is now taking action against her former employers for wrongful dismissal. But apparently she needn't bother because cancel culture doesn't exist, does it? The actor James Dreyfus was dropped from the audio range of Doctor Who stories for signing a letter to Stonewall calling for an open and respectful debate. The company not only dropped him, but erased his episodes from a compilation in which he was meant to be featured. I interviewed James about this on this very show, but clearly it didn't happen because cancel culture doesn't exist. Staying with the Doctor Who theme, the writer Gareth Roberts, who had written 6 episodes of the TV show Doctor Who, was removed from a list of authors for a Doctor Who short story anthology. Why? Because he argued that the trans activist movement reinforces outdated gender stereotypes. In other words, he expressed an opinion. And what about the textile artist Jess Duvals, who was driven out of her hairdressing salon in the Soho Theatre and had her artwork removed from sale in the Royal Academy gift shop for her gender-critical views? She was bombarded on Twitter with vitriolic messages and calls for her to commit suicide. On this show, I interviewed the Reverend Dr. Bernard Randall, a school chaplain at Trent College in Derbyshire, who told me about training sessions in which staff were instructed to chant "smash heteronormativity." And when he delivered a sermon about the importance of respectfully challenging such ideological viewpoints, he was reported to prevent the government's anti-terrorism programme. I also interviewed Neil Finn, a senior lecturer in social anthropology at the University of Edinburgh, who faced a 2-month investigation because he criticised a conference called Resisting Whiteness, which was offering racially segregated spaces. He was falsely accused of racism and rape apologism and faced a campaign of harassment and abuse. Other academics have experienced similar ordeals. Kathleen Stock eventually resigned from her role at the University of Sussex after she was targeted by activists. And Joe Phoenix, who I interviewed recently on my podcast, was diagnosed with PTSD after she sustained this sustained campaign of abuse and defamation against her for defending women's sex-based rights. And there was the former rector of Edinburgh University, Anne Henderson, who was falsely smeared by activists as transphobic and anti-Semitic and, quote, not fit to hold office, simply for tweeting about a meeting at the House of Commons on the proposed reforms to the Gender Recognition Act. One of the earliest examples of cancel culture was the Nobel Prize-winning biochemist Tim Hunt, who in June 2015 was ousted from his honorary position at University College London after jokes he made at a conference in Seoul were misrepresented by a journalist. We didn't call it cancel culture back then, of course, but the tactics were the same. So for a magical phenomenon, cancel culture has racked up an impressive number of casualties. And if you don't think cancel culture is real, maybe check out the website www.cancelledpeople.com, which logs known instances of people who have lost their jobs or had their reputations destroyed for expressing unfashionable views. Here's just a few more examples of these things that never happened but actually did happen. So in August 2019, the school teacher Christian Webb was fired after it was discovered that he had produced a number of comedy rap videos over a decade earlier as his alter ego MC Devo. In spite of the overtly comedic nature of these performances, their supposedly offensive nature made this a, quote, serious safeguarding issue, according to one parent at the school. You might remember in June 2020, Nick Buckley was ousted from the Mancunian Way, which was a charity he had set up to help the homeless and disaffected young people, after he criticised some of the more controversial aims of the Black Lives Matter organisation. In June 2021, the cricketer Ollie Robinson was banned from playing for 8 months due to offensive tweets he posted as a teenager. In addition to the ban from the Cricket Discipline Commission, he was fined £3,200 and was compelled to participate in anti-discrimination training. In 2020, the journalist Helen Lewis was hired by Ubisoft to record dialogue for their video game Watch Dogs Legion. When Ubisoft were alerted to Lewis's writings on gender identity, which were very compassionate but not in line with current intersectional trends, her voice was erased from the game and an apology was issued. In June 2021, it was reported that law student Lisa Keogh had been investigated by authorities at Abertay University in Scotland for saying that women have vaginas. Although she was cleared, she described the 2-month investigation as needlessly cruel, given that it coincided with her final examination period. And when I interviewed her for this show, She pointed out that when it comes to cancel culture, the process is the punishment. Now, I could go on. I could spend the whole show giving example after example of cancel culture in action, but denialists will continue to say it doesn't exist. This is what is known as belief perseverance, when you are shown evidence that contradicts your beliefs, but you stick to them anyway. And why do people do this? Because admitting that you are wrong is hard. It hurts the ego. And in these times of political tribalism, people seem to be more interested in being seen to win arguments than the pursuit of truth. The other reason, of course, why people will deny that cancel culture exists is because they want to carry on doing it. It's no accident that the sort of people who deny the existence of cancel culture are so often its chief practitioners. And the thing is, all of these examples and the thousands others available to anyone who cares to search for them are just the tip of the iceberg. Those are the ones that made it into the press. But most, of course, don't get any publicity. Organisations such as the Free Speech Union and Counterweight, which offer support to people who are facing disciplinary action for expressing their opinions, are both relatively new organisations, but they've been inundated with requests for help from people who have felt the brunt of cancel culture. And even if these instances of cancel culture were rare, which they're not, cancel culture works preemptively by fostering a climate in which most people are wary of speaking their minds. It only takes a few high-profile figures to be cancelled for everyone else to step into line. Activists don't go after J.K. Rowling because they seriously think they can get her cancelled. They do it as a warning to everyone else. With all their collective action, death threats, dog piles, and salvos of libel and abuse, they are sending a message to anyone who dares to think for themselves. And it works. Most people are afraid to have open discussions about sensitive topics because they've seen what can happen when you do. And this is the key point. Cancel culture isn't just holding the powerful to account. Most of the targets of cancel culture are ordinary people who don't have the resources to protect themselves. A notable example is the children's author Gillian Phillip, whose support of Rowling resulted in her being dropped by her publisher. And she has since retrained as a trucker and has written that the haulage industry is far more supportive and inclusive and a lot less misogynistic than the world of children's writing. So we need to be clear about what we mean when we talk of cancel culture. We don't mean that people are literally being cancelled, erased from existence for their views. Well, that does happen in extreme cases. If you think of the murders at the offices of the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, that's a case in point. But on the whole, when we talk about cancel culture, we are using a shorthand metaphor for a retributive system of public shaming and boycotting, often for relatively minor mistakes or unfashionable opinions, which is typically driven by social media. I've never been cancelled, but I'm in the privileged position of being able to say whatever I want as part of my job. But if I were to start swearing on air or breaching Ofcom rules, I would be fired. And that wouldn't be cancel culture. Because losing your job for doing it badly is not what we're talking about here. And nor are we talking about people who aren't offered a platform. Nobody has a right to a platform. I'm not cancelling people by not inviting them onto this show, just as I am not cancelling people by blocking them on social media. Nobody can force anyone else to listen to them. I've been blocked by hundreds of people online. They haven't cancelled me. They're just not interested in what I've got to say, which is weird. And the other thing we're not talking about when we mention cancel culture is people being criticised for what they've said. Nobody gets the right to be ring-fenced from criticism. The key difference is that when it comes to cancel culture, targets are denounced rather than criticised. And the consequences are hugely disproportionate to the perceived slight. And as the examples I've listed show, oftentimes complaints are addressed directly to employers in the hope of depriving the target of his or her livelihood. It's a very real trend. It's unempathetic, it's inhumane, it's uncivilized. It disregards the notion that people can make mistakes or change their minds, or that we should be forgiven for misspeaking or causing offence. It is, as the singer Nick Cave described it, mercy's antithesis. Cancel culture is bullying dressed up in the robes of virtue, and nobody likes a bully.